It was April 1945. A children's orphanage in southern Germany stood quiet in the cold spring rain. 80 German children, from ages 4 to 12, slept in iron cots beneath high plaster ceilings, while 6 Catholic nuns watched over them in the dark. But outside in the courtyard, heavy Mercedes command cars sat tucked under camouflage netting. Black cables snaked through the stone corridors, leading upstairs into the children's dormitory bedrooms, where high-powered military radio transmitters hummed against the walls. Armed sentries wearing the death's head insignia of the SS patrolled the stairwells and kept watch at the windows. An SS regimental headquarters had moved inside the building, turning 80 innocent orphans into human shields against the advancing American army. The commander assumed the Americans would never dare shell a house full of children. But he did not know a special operations force was already watching from the tree line, preparing a silent and lethal response. This is the story of what General Patton did when ruthless SS officers used a civilian orphanage of 80 children as their personal command post, and the elite paratroopers who cleared the rooms one by one. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show how some weapons require a soldier to break first. Major John Russo was 35 years old, an Italian-American from Newark, New Jersey, serving as a special operations officer attached to the 3rd Army from the 82nd Airborne Division. He had already parachuted into the midnight skies of Sicily, dropped into the fire of Italy, and fought through the blood-soaked hedgerows of Normandy. He was a man who specialized in surgical operations against hardened targets, a soldier who had seen the worst of combat and bore the invisible scars of lost friends across 3 fronts. When the intelligence report about the occupied orphanage landed on his desk, he did not see a tactical obstacle to be obliterated by artillery. He saw 80 captive children and 6 terrified women who needed a savior, not a bombardment. He knew the cost of standard warfare, and he refused to let these innocent lives become collateral damage in the final weeks of the European conflict. SS Standartenführer Bernhard Reimer was 47 years old, a ruthless regimental commander from Hamburg who had served the Nazi regime since 1933. His career was a bloody trail stretching from the invasion of Poland to the brutal occupations of France, Yugoslavia, and Russia. He wore a tailored wool uniform, unblemished by the mud of retreat, and a polished iron cross caught the dim light of his stolen quarters in the orphanage chapel. He boasted 240 documented civilian executions to his name, promotions earned through a cold philosophy he called operational effectiveness. To Reimer, the 80 children eating in the dining room and the 6 nuns scrubbing the floors were not human beings, but tactical assets. He openly stated to his officers that the Americans were weak-willed sentimentalists who would hold their fire if a child was in the crosshairs. He believed his human shields bought him 72 hours of absolute safety to coordinate the German rearguard defense, completely blind to the fact that his unearned privilege had just marked him for a silent execution. By April 1945, the German war machine was fracturing into chaotic, desperate pockets of resistance across Europe. The Allied armies rushed eastward, shattering major defensive lines and forcing the remaining German forces into disorganized retreats toward the southern mountains. In this atmosphere of collapse, formal military structure deteriorated into absolute lawlessness, creating dangerous scenarios where fanatical commanders operated entirely outside the rules of engagement. Broken communication lines and isolated pockets of troops meant that local commanders held absolute authority over whatever territory they occupied. Many American officers, eager to maintain the momentum of the rapid advance and protect their own men, had begun to look the other way when encountering complex civilian blockades, often choosing to bypass difficult positions or simply level them with heavy firepower from a distance. The pressure to end the war quickly created an environment where nuance was a luxury few units could afford. Standard operating procedure dictated that a confirmed enemy regimental headquarters was a high-priority target to be suppressed immediately by airstrikes or heavy artillery barrages, regardless of the structures surrounding it. But inside this specific valley, the presence of the trapped orphans made a conventional assault an unthinkable atrocity. The reports detailing the exact layout of a fortified building and the presence of the children had traveled swiftly through the chain of command, halting the tanks of the forward advance and bringing the entire local offensive to a sudden, tense standstill. A captain from the forward intelligence team stood inside a dim farmhouse down the road from the orphanage, looking at a hand-drawn map with Major Russo. The captain shook his head, pointing a calloused finger at the stone walls of the target. "We have 200 SS troops dug into that property, and their antenna arrays are broadcasting coordinates to artillery batteries across the river," the captain said. Russo adjusted his web gear and looked out the window toward the village. "Then we cut the wires and silenced the radios," Russo replied. The captain tapped his pencil on the map, his voice tight with frustration. "You do not understand, Major. They have the children sleeping in the rooms directly adjacent to the radio gear, and the nuns are trapped in the kitchen, preparing meals under armed guard. If we bring up the tanks, we crush the very people we came to liberate." "I am not bringing up tanks," Russo said, his voice flat. "Regulations require a full artillery preparation before an assault on a fortified headquarters," the captain countered, leaning over the table. "I cannot authorize an infantry advance into a hornet's nest without fire support, and the colonel will not risk 24 men on a suicide run through an open courtyard." Russo pulled a small, folded piece of paper from his pocket and laid it on the map. It was a note from Sister Maria Augusta, delivered by a child who had slipped past the guards. The note detailed the changing shifts of the sentries and a laundry system used to signal which rooms were occupied by the orphans. "This is a rescue, Captain, not an assault," Russo said. "The enemy commander believes we are too soft to shoot through children, so he is sitting tight. He is an SS Standartenführer with a record of executions from Warsaw to the Don River," the captain said, looking at the note. "He will use every child in that building as a shield before he surrenders. And his men will fight to the last bullet, because they know what faces them at a war crimes tribunal." "Then we do not give them a chance to fight," Russo said. "We go through the basement coal chute at midnight, use knives and silenced weapons, and take the building room by room." The captain looked at the major, seeing the hard determination of the airborne veteran. "This is completely outside standard operational guidelines, Major, and if a single child dies, the press will destroy us. This goes beyond my authority." "Put me on the radio to 3rd Army headquarters," Russo said. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton arrived within the hour. His command jeep splattered mud across the farmhouse driveway, coming to a sudden halt without an escort. The general walked into the command post unannounced, his uniform immaculate, the 4 stars gleaming on his helmet, and his signature ivory-handled revolvers resting against his hips. Every officer in the room snapped to attention, the air growing instantly cold. Patton did not raise his voice. He looked at the map, then turned his gaze directly onto Major Russo. "Are you certain your paratroopers can breach that basement without alerting the courtyard sentries?" "Major," Patton asked. "We have studied the coal chute and the layout from the nuns' notes," Russo replied. "We can do it in absolute silence, sir." "And you understand the consequences if this turns into an open firefight inside a dormitory," Patton said, his voice dropping an octave. Russo nodded. "The children are the priority, General. We take them room by room." Patton walked to the window, staring out toward the distant silhouette of the orphanage. "You have your authorization, Major. Take your 24 paratroopers and infiltrate the building under the cover of darkness. Save those children, protect the sisters, and keep that structure standing. I want Standartenführer Reimer alive if possible, because his crimes in the East require a proper courtroom before a rope. But if he raises a weapon, you kill him on the spot. The children come out alive, the nuns come out alive, and the building stays intact. Make it happen." The general turned back to the map, his jaw set in a hard line. Reimer believes he has found a flaw in American resolve. He thinks our morality is a weakness he can exploit to save his own miserable skin. He expects us to either retreat in fear or butcher these orphans in a blind rage, proving his own twisted theories about the brutality of war. But he does not comprehend the nature of real discipline. He does not understand that a soldier's true strength is the ability to use precision like a scalpel when the situation demands it. We are not going to level that building, and we are not going to leave those children to his mercy. We are going to walk into his fortress while he sleeps, strip him of his unearned power, and show him exactly what happens when his cowardice meets the cutting edge of the United States Army. Go get your men, Major. 2 options exist for the SS tonight: compliance, or total elimination, and either way, this ends at dawn. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, 24 American paratroopers slipped through the wet grass of the village and reached the orphanage coal chute. One by one, the soldiers slid silently into the pitch-black basement, their boots landing softly on the piles of dust. They moved up the stone stairs into the kitchen, where 2 SS sentries were neutralized with knives before they could raise an alarm. Russo led his team directly to the chapel. Finding Reimer and 6 senior officers asleep on heavy wool blankets beneath the crucifix, the German commander woke to the cold steel of a paratrooper's blade pressed against his throat, and a heavy hand covering his mouth, gagging and binding him before he could speak a single word. Room by room, the paratroopers cleared the corridors, using silenced weapons and swift, physical force against the remaining garrison. The 80 children slept soundly through the entire operation, comforted by the herbal sedatives Sister Maria Augusta had secretly mixed into their evening tea. By 7 o'clock, the building was entirely secure, and the children woke to the smell of frying bacon as American soldiers smiled and served them breakfast in the dining hall. Major Russo returned to Newark after the war, leaving the army behind but carrying the lessons of that silent night into a long career in law enforcement. He joined the police force, eventually becoming a pioneer in the development of early SWAT tactics and specialized hostage negotiation protocols for urban environments. In 1972, he published a detailed memoir titled The Orphanage Operation. When Surgery Replaced Slaughter, a book that quickly became required reading for tactical units across the nation. He died peacefully in 1991, his tactical legacy still taught as a foundational case study at the FBI Academy in Quantico. Standartenführer Bernhard Reimer did not escape the justice he had evaded for so many years across the Eastern Front. Bound and heavily girded, he was turned over to the War Crimes Commission and subsequently faced a tribunal at Nuremberg, where the evidence of his 240 civilian executions was presented to the court. He was convicted of crimes against humanity and walked to the gallows in 1947, unrepentant and bitter until the trapdoor opened. General Patton never spoke of the mission to the press, choosing to keep the official after-action report tucked away inside his personal desk drawer. He made a single mention of the raid in a private letter to his wife, noting that sometimes the greatest victories of the Third Army were the ones that never made the front-page headlines because not a single building fell. Some historians have argued that Patton violated standard military doctrine by authorizing a high-risk special operations raid on a fortified regimental headquarters instead of utilizing overwhelming artillery fire support. They contend that risking elite paratroopers in close-quarters room clearing was an unnecessary gamble that could have resulted in a tactical disaster if the garrison had successfully mobilized. Others have argued the opposite, defending the operation as a brilliant demonstration of flexible leadership that preserved valuable civilian infrastructure and prevented a horrific loss of innocent lives. What is certain is that the 80 children survived the final weeks of the conflict unharmed, because precision was prioritized over raw destruction. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have authorized the high-risk rescue operation, or would you have bypassed the position to protect your men? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about how some weapons require a soldier to break first, make sure to subscribe.